And here we are.
Okay.
Hi.
Hey, Stan.
Yes, I'm not on the.
I know.
You're here.
Well, that's a matter of opinion.
Well, you're physically present. Whether that you need the text, Stan.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Um,
Great. Okay.
So this is the reading for Yom Kippur as well.
It is. It is the reading for Yom Kippur.
Because I wondered why Mike responded to the request for readers so quickly. Whoops. 679.
Okay. So before I start, I'll say a few words. Only because I find myself fascinated sometimes by anomalies and inconsistencies and things that are just weird. Okay, and so we're reading Parashat Acharei, right? And I keep calling this the Ginsburg system, but because it was your request, and it made absolute sense. A few years ago when we started doing this, Stan's suggestion was that we look at material from the third of the parsha that we're actually going to read that next Shabbat, rather than just from anywhere or from the beginning. Okay, so we are in year 3 of the triennial cycle, right? And so if you've been paying attention to the text I've given, it says Parashat Chumash with Rashi, Parashat da-da-da-da-da, cycle 3. Right now, we're in year 3. What do you immediately notice about what we're reading?
We're reading the whole parsha.
Well, we're not reading the whole parsha. We're not reading the whole parsha.
It's more than just.
But we're reading from the beginning of the parsha, right? If we were reading the whole parsha, I would actually be less perturbed. Okay, but we're not reading the whole parsha. We're actually reading the first third of the parsha. Okay, so now I frankly don't know whether next year we'll read Acharei Mot, Kiddushim, or just Acharei Mot, because it is possible that you could actually, even though next year is definitely not a non-leap year, there are some portions that are still nevertheless read separately. But regardless, even if it's read as a double parsha, we'll be reading next year the beginning of Acharei Mot Kiddushim, so we'll be reading the same thing that we read this year, right? So why are we reading from the beginning of Parashat Acharei Mot in year 3 of the cycle? Good question. Okay. And, fortunately, the world of conservative Judaism is still small enough, and some of the things are still recent, that I actually know the rabbi who set up the triennial cycle. Okay, so I asked him, and he pointed out to me that, so it's not always regular year, leap year, regular year, leap year, because what is the overall cycle? 7 out of 19, right? So it's usually regular leap, but it could be regular leap, regular leap, right? So the year 1 of the triennial was a leap year. So we read the first third of the combined parsha, which really means the first 2/3 of Parashat Acharei Mot. Year 2 was also combined, so we read the second third of the double parsha, which means we read the end of Acharei and the beginning of Kedoshim. Now we're in year 3 of the parsha, so next week we actually have to read 2/3 of Kedoshim, right? Because we will not have read 2/3, right?
Right.
So if we just read the last third of Kedoshim, we actually wind up skipping the middle section, which we're not supposed to do, right? But we've already read all of Acharei.
Mm-hmm.
We've already read all of Acharei during year 1 and year 2 of the triennial cycle. So Rabbi Eisenberg could have said, "So fine, you'll just have a year off," right? But that's not what a sabbatical year. But that's not what he said, and he decided that since we've already read the whole parsha, but we only want to now read a third this year, we'll start again at the beginning. Why did he make that decision? He no longer recalls.
That must have been really important.
Okay, but that is the way it worked out. And actually, when I realized that earlier in the week, I got worried because I'm doing junior congregation, so I'm not reading, and I was worried that Joe might not have known that and have assigned differently than but he did. All the assignments are the same. Okay.
Rabbi, why is it a 3-year cycle?
Why is it a 3-year cycle?
Why not a 2 or 4?
Okay.
As short as they could make it.
Well, it is in a way. It is as short as they could make it in one sense. Okay, the halachic minimum is that on a Shabbat you must call up 7 people, and each Aliyah has to be at least 3 verses. Okay, and sometimes even with some of the shorter parshiot, when we're actually wind up doubling up. Like we read, let's say last year verses 1 through 35, and this year verses 30 through 22 of the next chapter. Like we do overlap because otherwise there won't be enough verses. Okay, so if we had a quadrennial cycle, we'd really run into that problem. We wouldn't have enough. Why not a biennial cycle? Well, the sort of, and I have to say really almost lip service reason, okay, is that there were, in fact, in early rabbinic times, 2 different Torah reading cycles. Okay, the cycle of reading the whole Torah in 1 year is from Babylonia. In Israel, they read the whole Torah every 3 years. Okay, but it wasn't the way we do it now. It was like, a little bit, they read the whole thing consecutively, but the portions were smaller, and they read over 3 years rather than over 1. And at a certain point, congregations started truncating the Torah reason, right? For a couple of reasons. One is that, the supply of old men from Europe who could read backwards and forwards without any preparation was starting to diminish, right? And also the Sitzfleisch of people was starting to, physically more Sitzfleisch, but spiritually less, right? And so people, the services are too long, et cetera, right? So it's a combination of the length of the service and the difficulty of finding enough Torah readers, right? So they wanted to shorten it, and there was precedent for doing it over 3 years, right? But there's also a desire, and there is, congregations have experimented with, because we know what the ancient, pardon the word, Palestinian the ancient Palestinian 3-year cycle was. We know it.
Mhm.
And there have been congregations that have experimented with doing it that way, but they always gave them up because you find yourself out of sync with the rest of the Jewish world, right? I mean, throughout the world, tomorrow, Saturday morning, the drasha will be on Parashat Acharei, right? And you're still, towards the end of the book of Genesis or whatever, right? So you're out of sync with the rest of the world. So there is another system which I think is actually superior because you're not skipping within the year, but it depends on reliably having a minyan for service other than Shabbat, okay? Because there are 4 times during the week that the Torah is read. It's read Saturday afternoon, right? The beginning of the next parsha, we read Saturday afternoon, right? So if we had Saturday minyan, if we had mincha and a minyan, we would read the beginning of Kedoshim, right? So it's read Saturday afternoon, it's read Monday morning and Thursday morning. Okay, so there is another cycle. Actually, this is what some congregations in Europe in particular used to do, is that the first aliyah was, but divided up into 3, right? So the first aliyah was read Saturday afternoon. The second aliyah was read Monday morning. The third aliyah was read Thursday morning, and then the end is read Saturday morning. So you've read the whole thing, but you're reading roughly half of what you would otherwise be reading on a Saturday morning. So it does shorten it, not quite as much as the triennial. We could never do that because we don't have mincha, and we don't have morning services. So, but in a larger congregation, there are some conservative congregations that do that. But they tend to be very large congregations that reliably have a minyan for those 3 other services.
And Orthodox would do that?
No.
Okay.
No. Orthodox congregation would read the whole parsha
Saturday morning.
Right.
Saturday morning. So Saturday afternoon, Monday morning, and Thursday morning, they read the same thing. Okay, the beginning of the parsha, but it's the same reading for Saturday afternoon, Monday morning, and Thursday
They read
morning.
it 3 times, or they do a third?
No. They read the same thing 3 times.
One. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look at the back of your siddur there, and you'll see the weekday Torah readings. Yeah, no, it's the same thing. It's essentially assuming that the first aliyah has at least 9 verses. So it's the first aliyah of the full parsha divided into 3. Okay, and if the first aliyah isn't long enough, then they'll go into the second aliyah because it has to be at least 9 verses. Okay.
What happens to the haftarahs during this period when there is a split? I mean, there is
a haftarah for Acharei and there is a haftarah for Kedoshim.
Okay.
Right. I mean, actually, this year it's irrelevant. This year in particular is irrelevant because it's also Machar Chodesh, this Shabbat. But no, there is each Torah portion has its own accompanying haftarah. But as a general rule, when it's a combined, you read the one for the second parsha. So if it's Acharei Mot Kedoshim, you read Kedoshim. So Acharei Mot is only read roughly once every 2.8 years or something like that, and actually even less. So in this 3-year cycle, the haftarah for Acharei Mot won't be read at all, because last year was Kiddushim, the year before was Kiddushim, unless it could also, sometimes this is also Shabbat HaGadol, and so on and so forth, right? There are certain haftarot that are almost never read because they're almost routinely superseded by something else. But there is a haftarah for Acharei Mot, and there is a haftarah for Kiddushim. All right?
But there's one more situation, and that is we're out of sync now with Israel. It's only the diaspora that's reading.
Right, because they would have read Acharei Mot in Israel last Shabbat, right? Because in Israel, Pesach is only 7 days.
That's right.
Right. So So last Shabbat was, yes, that sometimes happens. Okay, when the last day of a holiday is Shabbat, then Israel and the diaspora fall out of sync. Okay, and they won't get back into sync until, I don't know exactly. I mean, the next time that you have essentially a double parsha, right? So in Israel, they'll read the double parsha, or no, we would read the double parsha. We would read the double parsha, and they would read the single parsha, and we would catch up. So for several weeks, Israel and the diaspora are out of sync, but at least the whole diaspora is in sync with each other, right? Okay. It's complicated for Reform congregations. No, it does, because they only, in theory, only do 7 days, right? But they also like to be in sync with everybody else. So because I have a lot of friends who are Reform rabbis, right? So those Reform congregations that have Saturday morning services, which is not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, some of them read Acharei Mot last week, and some of them read the reading for the 8th day of Pesach, even though by them it wasn't the 8th day of Pesach. Okay, but since we're on the subject, and then we'll get into the actual Parsha, in Israel, last Shabbat, even though it was Shabbat and no longer Pesach, you still had to eat Pesach, right? Because you couldn't, you couldn't. Well, first of all, you couldn't go out and buy chametz, but even the chametz that was in your house, you couldn't eat because it hadn't been bought back yet, right? Because we went right from Yontif into Shabbat.
Right.
Can't be bought back. So you had, essentially in that sense, you had 8 days of Pesach food even in Israel, even though the last day wasn't actually Pesach.
Isn't there a special service at the end of Pesach?
There's not a special service. The Hasidim have Sudat Mashiach. Yeah. So they would have had that Friday afternoon in Israel and Saturday afternoon in the diaspora. Okay.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sure. No, thank you for asking. It's always nice when people ask me questions to which I know the answer.
We'll have to work on that.
Yeah, I trust you, Stan. All right. So, Acharei Mot. V'yidaber Adonai al Moshe Acharei Mot shnei b'nei Aharon b'kirvatam livnei Adonai vayamutu. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons when they came near to the Lord and they died. Okay. Now, what you will notice is that the Parsha says, right, it's called Acharei Mot, after the death, right, begins. God spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons. There is nothing in here about the death of Aaron's 2 sons. Nothing. Right? That was, a few weeks ago, couple Parshiot ago, couple of Parshiot back. And it's the rules of the, essentially of the service for Yom Kippur. Right? So why does it start? Why do we need to know about, this happened after the death of Aaron's sons? Right? So Rashi is going to ask that question, obviously, right? Because it seems to be sort of just stuck in there, right? It's not really, at least on the surface, relevant to the content of the Parsha. Stan, you have something else? No? Okay. Theory on why? All right, let's look at Rashi. Okay. V'yidaber Hashem el Moshe acharei mot shnei b'nei Aharon vagomer. God spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, etc. Ma Talmud lama haya. Why? Right? What does this teach us? Right? Why do we need to know this? Haya Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah moshlo mashal. So Rabbi ben Azariah said this is like a parable. Okay? L'cholei shenichnas etzlo rofeh. A patient who a doctor came to see him. Amarlo al tochal tzonen va'al tishkav b'tachav. The doctor said, don't eat cold food and do not lie down in a cold, damp place. Okay, good advice, I guess. I don't know what's wrong with eating cold food, although maybe, back then they didn't have refrigeration. Cold food might be like not so healthy. I don't know. But yeah, right? Sleeping in a cold, damp place, not good for your health, right? All right. Ba'acher, another doctor said, Va'amarlo al tochal tzonen va'al tishkav b'tachav, a second doctor came and said, don't eat cold food and don't lie down to sleep in a cold, drafty place. Shelo tamud kederach shemet ploni. So you won't die like this other guy died. Ze zirzo yoter min harishon l'chach acharei mot shnei b'nei Aharon. All right, so the second doctor, his warning was more effective, right? And that's why it says after the death of the two sons of Aaron. Okay, do you understand? First of all, obviously, they didn't have HIPAA back then. Right? Right. I mean, unless he said, well, I had a patient who, but it didn't. It said Plony. Plony is Hebrew for John Doe. Oh. Okay. So they obviously, they didn't have HIPAA back then. But, it's more effective, right? If you do this, you could die. Right? Versus if you do this, you could die like, remember Norm Goldberg? He did this and it didn't didn't turn out so well for him, right? So now this may not make sense yet if you don't know what's going to come next, but obviously, right, it's dealing with when you're allowed to go into the sanctuary, when you're allowed, how you're allowed, so on and so forth, right? And remember, I mean, I always think about this when I read this, particularly on Yom Kippur, right, is that Aaron is being told, go into the Holy of Holies and do this and do that and do the other thing. The only time that anybody has ever gone into the Holy of Holies before the first Yom Kippur was Nadav and Avihu. And they died, right? I mean, the courage to be able to do something that the only time anybody has ever done it before, they both died. And not only they both died, not some random people, your sons, right? And I have to say, I mean, I am not a mystically inclined guy, and I'm not comparing myself to Aaron, but on Hagim, when I go up to Duchen, I catch my breath a little bit. It is to me the most awesome, in the literal sense of the word, religious experience that I have on a regular basis, right? Precisely because it's completely irrational, right? But if I feel that way, just going up to do Birkat Kohanim, how must Aaron have felt, on the first Yom Kippur in particular, right? So,
and the congregation waited in fear to see if he would come out again.
Absolutely. Okay. God said to Moses, Daber el Aharon achicha, speak to your brother Aaron, va'al yavo b'chol ed el hakodesh. He should not come at all times into the sanctuary, mibet la parochet, within the dividing curtain, el panei hakaporet, so asher al ha'aron. He should not come into the sanctuary in front of the cover. The kaporet and parochet is the same word. I mean, now we use it for the curtain that covers, the curtain that covers the ark, right? It says parochet.
Mm.
Parochet and kaporet, sometimes you see that also with the word for sheep. Sometimes it's keves, sometimes it's kesev. Velo yamut. All right, he should not do that lest he die, right? He should not do this lest he die. Ki be'anan erei al hakaporet, right? Because I will appear over the ark cover in a cloud. All right, so Lord said to tell your brother Aaron he shouldn't come into the sanctuary whenever he feels like it, right? All right, what does it say here? What's the translation here? Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die, for I appear in the cloud over the cover. Okay. A little hard to understand. Vayomer Adonai Moshe deber Aharon achicha v'al yavo. God said to Moses, speak to Aaron your brother, tell him not to come in. Shelo yamut kederach shemetu banav, so that he should not die the way his sons died. Right? That's the connection to the first verse, and that's also the connection to the death of Nadav and Avihu, right? If you go in at will, in other words, whenever you feel like it, you're going to have the same fate as your sons. V'lo yamut she'im ba hu met, so that he not die, for if he does enter, he will die. Okay. Ki va'anan era'e, because I appear in a cloud. I continually appear there with my pillar of cloud, and therefore, since my divine presence is revealed there, he must be careful not to accustom himself to enter. All right. Right. That you're not supposed to come too close to God's presence, right? I mean, there is something, and we've seen that. We see this other place in the Torah, like the classic example is like when they're bringing, hundreds of years later, right? When under David they're bringing the ark up to Jerusalem, right? And it's on a wagon pulled by oxen, right? And it hits a bump or something, and the ark it starts to fall out, and somebody reaches up to steady the ark, and
he's gone.
He's gone. Right? So, the divine is dangerous, right? You don't approach it too often. All right, so this is the pshat, right? This is the plain, simple meaning. Midrasho lo yavo ki im be'anan hakator b'yom kippurim. But the midrash is he should not come except with the cloud of incense on Yom Kippur. Right? So, but if you look at it, right, he should not come at will because I appear in a cloud. Right? The pshat and the drash are actually completely opposite. Right? The pshat says he shouldn't come into the shrine because my cloud is there and he'll die, right? But the Midrash says he should only come into the sanctuary when the cloud is there. It's the cloud of incense, right? That whether it's the incense that provides protection, or Yom Kippur provides protection, or the fact that he's doing it in specific obedience to God's will as opposed to, his own sort of desires or his own excess of spiritual enthusiasm. But I find it interesting that the pshat and the drash are almost exactly the opposite. Okay? Bezot yavo Aharon el hakodesh. With this shall Aaron enter the shrine. All right. Here, the other, thus only shall Aaron enter the shrine. Okay, there's a lot of midrashic stuff on bezot, right? You'll notice because zot is feminine for this, okay? But par ben bakar, the bull, a young bull is not a zot, it's a zeh,
Yeah.
right? And also, I mean, if you notice the psalm that we read during the season of Penitent, it says, Bezot ani boteach. I trust in Zot. Okay, so it's a lot of midrashic stuff, some of which I did learn but kind of forgot. But, so what is Bezot? Okay, so Rashi says the gematria, you know what gematria is?
Well, yeah, the front is numerical value. Each letter has a
Right.
numerical value.
Okay, so the gematria of Zot is 410, which is an allusion to the number of years that the first temple would stand. Okay, the first temple apparently stood 410 years. Okay, Bezot yavo Aharon v'gomer v'avzu lo b'cholet, but not whenever he wants, right? In other words, don't read it narrowly, right? Aaron shall come with a year-old bull. And then you say, well, whenever I want to go into the Holy of Holies, all I need to do is bring with me a year-old bull. No. This is an additional condition. It's not an exclusive condition, right? He should only come on Yom Kippur, but when he comes, it's with a year-old bull. Okay? Not whenever he wants, ki im b'yom kippurim, but rather on Yom Kippurim, as it says at the end of this parsha, b'chodesh hashvi'i b'asor chodesh, in the 7th month, on the 10th of the month. Okay. Now, chapter 5, verse 5, there's no Rashi on, but I thought it was important to bring verse 5 along with verse 6, because otherwise verse 6, the Rashi doesn't make sense. Okay. Ume'et adat b'nei Yisrael yikash shnei se'iri izim l'chatat v'ayel echad la'olah. And from the community of the Israelites, he shall take 2 he-goats as we'll call it a sin offering. I don't want to get to what chatat really means. I think it really means purification offering, but that's irrelevant. Should take 2 he-goats as a purification offering, v'ayel echad la'olah, 1 ram as a burnt offering, right? Yom Kippur, right? But reminiscent of Abraham's sacrifice instead of Isaac, right? Which we connect to the high holidays, right? Although more really to Rosh Hashanah than to Yom Kippur, right? But point is, he takes 2 goats and a ram from the children of Israel. So that's verse 5. V'hikriv Aharon et par hachatat asher lo v'chiper ba'ado uva'ad beito. Right? And Aaron shall bring his sin offering bull, right? And initiate atonement for himself and for his household. Okay? Now, this is interesting. Lamedcha kansha mishalo huba velo mishal tzibur. Scripture's reference to his teaches you here that this bull had to be purchased from Aaron's own money rather than from public funds. Why?
It's for his own family.
It's for his own family. Okay, now, I find what?
Where did he get private funds?
Where did he get private funds?
The shoemaker.
Well, no, I mean, look, the Kohen Gadol had support. I mean, when it says Aaron, it means, you know, the Kohen Gadol, right? They received tithes, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the Kohen Gadol received a salary, but the point that Rashi's making is that this bull is to atone for the Kohen Gadol and his family, and therefore it comes from his financial resources, not from the public. Okay, if the sacrifice is on behalf of the public pays. If the sacrifice is on behalf of you and your family, you pay. Okay, again, I find this fascinating. Okay, and here I'm going to say, right, the tragedy of our era is that every time you make a statement, see, the Torah says that people should not enrich themselves at the public trough. Mm-hmm. Oh, he's criticizing the president. Well, if the president wouldn't do things that the Torah says not to do, it wouldn't be perceived as a criticism of the president every time you quote the Torah. Right? But, you know, now this is a principle that the Torah established 3,500 years ago, right? Just because you are a public official does not mean that all your expenditures are covered by the public, right? If the expenditure is on behalf of the public, it's covered by the public. If the expenditure is on behalf of itself, right, then you, on behalf of yourself, you cover it. And it's interesting. I mean, it's like, you know, thinking about it, right? I mean, it is in my contract, right, that when we have a Shabbat dinner here or whatever, I and Kelly do not pay. Okay, because it's part of my job. Right now, would I get fired if I missed a Shabbat dinner? No. Would I get fired if I missed every Shabbat dinner? My tongues would certainly wag, right? But when the sisterhood has its bowling party on Christmas, I pay for that out of my own pocket, right? Because I think it's not strictly part of my job, and we enjoy the bowling and whatever, and we're gaining a benefit, right? It's not really, you know, but that's the general principle, okay? So that you should not unjustly enrich yourself, you know, at the expense of the public. I mean, I'll give you another example. This computer, okay? I bought this computer to use specifically for Zoom for my adult education classes, right? Because I got tired of schlepping my own personal computer back and forth. And then there were days that I forgot it and I had to go home and get it and da-da-da-da. And I said, look, I'm using it for adult education, right? So I bought this out of my discretionary fund. But I'm telling you now, because if I should leave the congregation, I should not take this with me. It belongs to the congregation because I paid for it out of congregation funds, right? If it was to belong to me personally, I should pay for it out of my own pocket, right? And that is a principle that this Parsha establishes, that public officials do not get to enrich themselves at the public trough.
I would say if you read the newspaper every day, that on a daily basis, this is not followed.
No, on a daily basis, it's clearly not followed. No, it's clearly not followed. I mean, there was an article within the last day or two about what's going on at Mar-a-Lago, right? And there was $1,000 liquor bill. Now, that wasn't Trump, because Trump doesn't drink, okay? But it was his staff members, right? And it was charged to the State Department because they drank $1,000 worth of liquor while the Prime Minister of Japan was there. Okay. Problem is, aside from the fact that the federal government is paying a bar that the president owns for the president's staff members to drink liquor, the federal government is not supposed to pay for liquor. You worked for the federal government, right? Were you traveled for work?
Yeah.
You got a per diem?
Right.
Were you allowed to buy liquor with your per diem?
Yes.
You were?
You didn't have to account for your per diem.
Oh, you didn't have to account for your per diem.
But let's say any party
Not that I did,
celebration
but-
of government property, you could not have any alcoholic beverage.
Right. Okay. So all that I'm saying is I am not saying that the Torah or Rashi intended to criticize the practices of the current president. But I am saying that the practices of the current president are contrary to the Torah and contrary to Rashi's understanding of that. And that's not my fault. It's not my fault.
It's contrary to government rules too.
Yeah, well,
But I mean, to me,
but if the president does it, it's not illegal.
but to me, I mean, this is a very moral way of doing it. I mean,
Right.
to me, this is what we should all aspire to. But when you look at big CEOs and political people, on a daily basis, they're spending money on this that shouldn't be, or they're borrowing on that, or they're taking.
Yeah, I mean, the difference with a CEO is that it's not at the public trough.
Right, they're not using
Right.
our
Well,
tax
yes, but
money.
still.
Right. No, I mean, it may be unseemly,
But it's
It
not
is.
public, yeah.
but, if you think a CEO is stealing from the stockholders, that's between the CEO and the stockholders,
Mhm.
right? When the president is stealing from the public,
Right.
that's between the president and it's a whole different different. I mean, I agree with you, but it's a whole different thing. Or for that matter, unions, right? I mean, there are certainly, I'm sure that there are union officials who are
Living well beyond
living well,
well.
at the, on union dues. And but that's between the union members and the union staff. That's not a public concern. I mean, unless they're hiding it or, whatever, submitting reimbursement for things that they didn't actually expend or whatever, which people do also, right? Okay. All right. And he shall take the 2 he-goats and place them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Right? And Aaron shall place lots upon the 2 he-goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other lot for Azazel. Okay. Right. Now, right, we read this every Yom Kippur, right? In fact, we read it twice every Yom Kippur, right? Because we read it in the Torah reading, and then we read it again during the Avodah service, right? Not word for word from the Torah, but a paraphrase of it. Now, what is this Azazel stuff, right? Without looking at Rashi, when you read this, right, you've all been around. I have been around 58 Yom Kippurs. All of you have been around for more than that, okay? You read this every year. What does it mean, one goat for the Lord and 1 for Azazel? What do you think it means when you read it?
I always wondered what it meant because who is, what is Azazel? Is this for the other? The one is for the Lord, and one is for the other beings or whatever.
Or like the devil, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? Stan?
No.
No?
No.
Then what?
I don't have a comment.
Okay, you don't have
Yeah.
no. That's
Yeah.
and that's fair too.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's complicated by the fact that I actually learned to speak Hebrew before I was very interested in Judaism per se. Okay, and in modern Hebrew, if you want to tell somebody go to hell, lech
Go.
la'azazel.
Ah.
Lech la'azazel means go to hell.
Mhm.
Okay, so clearly whoever originated that phrase, which I assume is not biblical or rabbinic,
Mhm.
right, also thought that Azazel is a demon or whatever. Okay. All right. So first, Rashi describes the exact procedure of the lots, okay, which I'm less interested in, right? But the lots were mixed up, and he didn't. What's interesting, Rashi says, he didn't put in one hand. He didn't take out one lot and then another lot, right? He put both hands in at the same time and put one lot in one hand and another lot in another hand, took them both out at the same time. Okay, so I don't know why exactly, but Azazel. Okay, so Rashi's second comment. Azazel, who har az v'kasheh. This is a strong and hard mountain. Tzok gavoa, a high cliff. Shenema eretz gezerah. It says later in verse 22, a precipitous land cut off. Okay, so Rashi says Azazel is not a person, it is a place. Okay, and it is a hard mountain with a precipitous cliff, right? And so they would chase the goat, and it would fall over the cliff and die.
So what would really be the purpose of that?
What would be the purpose of that?
I read ahead a little.
Well, I mean, I'm going to speak about this Saturday morning, but Aaron placed the sins of the people on this goat, and the goat carried the sins off into the wilderness. Okay, and we call this the scapegoat ritual. Okay, now what's interesting is, all right, and so there's a whole lot of anthropological theory about this, much of which I have read, okay, or at least read about. Okay, and what's fascinating is that the scapegoat ritual is precisely the opposite of contemporary scapegoating, right? Because, right?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
Right, because when we scapegoat somebody, we say all of the problems of our society are because of the Latinos or the gays or the CEOs. Okay, I'll be even-handed, right? Or George, all of the problems in our society are because of George Soros, right? Or all of the problems in our society are because of the Koch brothers, right? And that's scapegoating, right? Because clearly all of the problems of society are not, I mean, some of them may be, right? But blame is actually fairly diffuse, right? Nobody thought that this poor goat was responsible for all of the problems of Israelite society, right? It was simply a sacrificial victim, right? And by killing the goat, you didn't have the need or desire to kill others, right? Because you got to start. Now, again, I mean, now this, if you're a Jew who knows theology, it's going to start to make you uncomfortable, right? Because this sounds awfully a lot like the atoning death of Jesus, right? But where did they get that idea from?
From this.
Right, where did they get that idea from?
Acharei said that he died for our sins.
Right.
The goat died for our sins.
The goat died for our sins, right?
What I don't get is that in the other parts, it seems like, and maybe I don't know enough, but it seems like that animals were sacrificed for sins, the sin offering. But this seems like the only place where an animal's sent off. Why didn't they just sacrifice the animal instead of, like, why did it was something different for that?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that this is a very ancient ritual, right? And frankly, you know, it's uncomfortable. And beyond that, I mean, there are certain things that if they weren't explicitly commanded in the Torah, we couldn't do them at all, right? I mean, because Halakha is very explicit about the proper method of killing an animal, right? I mean, it has to be cut the jugular as painless as possible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Throwing an animal off a cliff to its death is not generally an approved method of animal slaughter. Right? I mean,
they didn't throw it off the cliff.
They chased it off. They chased.
Right.
All right, but
it's the same thing, but it's
okay, right, Beseder. But you know, if a parent of a Hebrew school kid came to me and said, you know, my kid chased an animal on purpose over a cliff. What does Judaism say about that? That's not something that you should do.
Right.
Right? Not something that you should do. Except in this particular case, right? Because we are explicitly commanded to do so. Right? But otherwise we could not do it. It's not an approved method of, and it's not the way we did sacrifices in general, right? I mean, in general, the sacrifices followed, at least the rabbis think. I mean, we don't know necessarily what actually happened, right? But according to the Mishnah, the same rules of method of kosher slaughter was how they killed the sacrificial animals in the temple. Slit across the jugular. And if it wasn't done properly, it wasn't a valid sacrifice. Right? So you know, why and where it's puzzling. It's puzzling and it's troubling. All right.
It'd be interesting to do research and find out if that practice was related to when they were in Egypt or.
No, Egyptians didn't sacrifice, but the Semitic people, all the Semitic peoples were having used a sacrificial method for worship, which is one of the reasons also why the Romans had issues with they looked down on the Carthaginians because they were a Semitic people, and they did ritual slaughter as done throughout the Semitic world.
The Romans didn't sacrifice animals?
No, they did not.
I did not know that. Wow.
They only did it for, you know, like for augury, you know, for a prediction. But like the Greeks, they did not do.
Right.
If they do that, they did not do ritual sacrifices.
Right now. All right. So here's what I'll say that I feel, you know, on solid ground. I don't really know too much about ancient Egyptian ritual practices. If you say that the Egyptians did not sacrifice animals, I'll believe you. I think that there are hints of that in the book of Exodus, right? Where you know, where, for example, Moses, because originally Moses is just asking, let us go sacrifice, right? And he says, let us go 3 days journey into the wilderness and sacrifice, and then we'll come back. And Pharaoh says, we'll just sacrifice here. And Moses says, no way, right? Because you guys are going to get mad at us if we do that. Right? Now, Moses' reasoning is that these bulls are the gods of the Egyptians, but the bulls were not the gods of the Egyptians, right? Yeah. So it could well be. Now, for sure, other Semitic peoples did sacrifice because we find altars similar to Israelite altars in other places. And I'll close with this, okay, because Maimonides, right, who is, who is only what, 900 years ago? Maimonides, right? 900 years ago. So way, way closer to us than to this, right? Maimonides is very, very, very uncomfortable with the idea of animal sacrifice. Very uncomfortable. He does not like it at all. Okay, because to him, the ideal religious life is contemplation of the divine and unity with the divine. It's not really messy animal sacrifice stuff, right? But what's he going to do? I mean, the Torah is very explicit, right? That this is what you're supposed to do, right? Or what we were supposed to do, right? Now, so how does Maimonides resolve his discomfort? He says, God didn't want this. Okay, and actually there are hints of this going back even earlier than Maimonides, right? But, Maimonides says essentially you have to pitch your material to the audience, right? And the Israelites were not capable of visualizing a religion that didn't have animal sacrifices, right? So God instituted animal sacrifices not for himself, but for the Israelites because they sort of demanded and expected it, right? And then if you look at the golden calf, right? Now, this is a non-chronological reading, but for the rabbis, the Torah is not necessarily narrated chronologically, right? But so for the rabbis, even though there's description of the sacrifice of certain sacrificial rules before the account of the golden calf, the rabbis say the golden calf took place before all the sacrificial rituals were revealed. And why? Because the people had no religion. All right, they were essentially like Unitarians, right? Like, so God originally wanted us to be like Unitarians, but so the people said, "Oh, we got to sacrifice, right? Well, God wants that." So they set up their own system, right? And God said, "This is for sure not what I had in mind," right? So if these people are going to set up their own system, forget that. I'm going to give them a system, even though I have no need of it, right? I have no need of it, but they have a need of it. And I said I was going to close with that, but I lied because I'll give you an example. Okay, I mean I think it actually relates to this. All right, so I was on the faculty of what's now the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies for a year, which is the Conservative Movement Seminary in LA. Okay, and I was the head mashgiach for the cafeteria. Okay, I was not what's called the Rav HaMachshir. In other words, I was not the one who decided what the practices would be. That was Rabbi Dorf. But I was the one who day to day sort of, implemented and inspected and so on and so forth. Okay? And I went in there one day to poke around and see what's in the freezer. And I found a case of French fries because what happens if you have a distributor, right? And you order a certain brand, right? And for a kosher establishment, the distributor is not supposed to substitute a brand, right? If they're out of that brand, then you just don't get the product. If another non-kosher restaurant or store or whatever, they might send a different brand. Okay, the distributor wasn't supposed to change brands, but at the same time, whenever a delivery was made, somebody from the dining hall was supposed to watch every item that came off the truck to make sure it was the right item. Okay, I found a case of frozen French fries that were treif, okay? Not simply didn't have kosher certification, out and out treif, because they were made with beef tallow, okay? And not, I assure you, not kosher beef tallow, okay? What's worse is that the carton was open. So
Really?
they had actually been used in the cafeteria, right? So Rabbi Dorf was actually out of the country, I think. So I went to Rabbi Danny Gordis, and we sat down and we analyzed the situation halachically. Okay, and so here is where there's the principle of, you know, and I've taught some of the kashrut stuff, so you may be familiar, but we know about the 1/60th rule, right? But there's also the majority rule, batel barov. Okay, so we decide, because the question is now, what do we do with all the plates, right? They might have had treif, mamash treif, not just something not certified kosher, right? But actual treif served on it. All right, but we didn't know, right? So we decided that the likelihood of any particular plate having had treif French fries served on it was less than 50-50, right? So therefore, any plate could be assumed not to have had it. Okay. Also, the plates were plastic, which means they can't be koshered. Mm-hmm. So we concluded that the plates, A, couldn't be koshered, but B, didn't need to be koshered. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, having decided that the plates didn't need to be koshered and couldn't be koshered, we made the kitchen staff kosher all the plates. Why?
A lesson. A
lesson, exactly, right? So that they shouldn't simply think, well, if we make a mistake, the rabbis will come up with some mumbo jumbo and it'll all be fixed, right? We wanted an object lesson for the staff that when you're supposed to check everything that comes off the truck, we mean you're supposed to check everything that comes off the truck. And also students were upset. Right? And I mean, this was only first and second year rabbinic students, so not, so super knowledgeable about kashrut, but the fact that we koshered the plates made them feel better, right? So was it strictly necessary? No. Did it nevertheless accomplish something?
Yes.
Yes, right? And I think the analogy to this actually holds, I think. I don't know. So, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Stan? Something?
No, separately after they leave.
Okay.
Okay, I was wrong about the Egyptian because they mummified animals.
Okay.